Yeah, with too much
Amelia, are you doing okay on caffeine?
Actually, yeah, I gave up. Okay. Sort of the mellow thing.
Okay, we're on. Good morning. Oh, actually, give me the mic. Good morning. Let's see if this mic is on. Is it on? Yes, I have to use a mic because we are webcasting, and I've discovered when I actually looked at one of my webcasts that when I talk, I move my head a lot, which meant the microphone here was I was talking and getting quieter and back and forth. So I struggle with the technology. Good morning. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Jennifer Turner. I direct the China Environment Forum. I have a number of new people here, which means I will subject you to the introduction of the Wilson Center, which was founded in 1968 by Congress as a memorial to our 28th president, the only PhD president, as I like to disseminate that fact. And in his spirit, we're in some ways I call us we focus on foreign policy, and we're a meeting machine. We put on about 600 meetings a year across 13 different projects and programs, trying to bring together diverse groups, government, NGO, business, and researchers for nonpartisan discussions. I've been directing the China Environment Forum for a lucky 8 years so far. The project is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. Go team. And we've been working, we bring together government, NGO, business, and researchers initially in the U.S. and China, but since I came 8 years ago, I started bringing in folks from around the world. So I jokingly call us the China Environment Mafia, that we focus on energy and environmental issues in China. And what's cool with the internet is that actually there are people who around the world are watching us on the internet, which is a reason why when we do the Q&A, I will ask you to speak with a microphone so those folks out in Cyberland can hear you. Today, we have a meeting titled Water, Water Everywhere, but None Within Reach. And this is in some ways kind of like a second anniversary, because we had a similar meeting on this topic a year ago. This is part of a project funded by USAID called the China Environmental Health Project that is led by Western Kentucky University, specifically this gentleman here, Chris Groves. And it aims to promote environmental health research in karst water and coal monitoring in China, in Yunnan and Anhui, respectively. And actually, I have to, before I go any further and let Chris talk, I have to start off with the same question I did a year ago. Those of you in the audience, raise your hand if you know what I mean when I say karst landscape. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 people. Last year it was 3. So, but it's a different audience. But see, last year we actually had 60 people. Last year it was an uber hot topic last year, I guess. But you will walk out of here actually knowing what karst means. I'm not going to tell you because Chris does it much better. Don't be scared. This is not like a geography class, even though he does teach geography and geology classes. Chris Groves, he's a professor of geography and director of the Hoffman Environmental Research Institute at Western Kentucky University. He's probably one of the leading karst experts in the country, and half of you are like, but what is karst? You'll know shortly. He has developed an active research program in geochemistry and hydrogeology of karst landscape and aquifer systems, as well as global issues in water supply and environmental health. He's worked on many international projects, and most notably, for the last 12 years, he's been doing karst water projects in China. And he's going to tell you about that in a minute. Today, he's going to focus on the work that he has been doing with Yuan Daoshen in China, who was a speaker last year, on their work in Yunnan province on karst. And following his introduction, Amelia Chung will talk about what she is doing to assist Chris in the community outreach component of the project. So before we start, I am going to pass the mic around and just have you say your names and affiliations real quickly so the speakers know who you are.
Hi, my name is Ting Xu. I'm from Johns Hopkins University. I'm a master's student there.
My name is Zach Miller. I work at EPA on the WaterSense program. Check us out at epa.gov/WaterSense.
Oh, I love it.
And
the man knows the technology.
I'm not familiar with the whole karst subject, but I traveled to southwest China recently, so I'm really interested to learn about it. Thanks, guys.
My name is Jessica Lasky-Fink with the European Commission, and I don't think I'm going to give you my website.
Hi, I'm Fan Fang. I go to Georgetown University. My name is Kathleen McAllister. I work at the National Academy of Sciences.
My name is Amanda Chu. I'm Department of State.
My name is Changlin Rao. I come from Renmin University of China, and now I'm exchange visitor in American University.
Morning, my name is Mike Rosenblum, consulting with KM3 Group.
Good morning, my name is Mayu. I'm Jennifer's research intern, and I go to school at University of Denver Graduate School of International Studies.
My name is Chen Wen. I'm with the Partnerships for Sustainable Healthcare, part of US EPA.
And a former speaker.
I'm Frances Lee with the National Science Foundation Office of International Science and Engineering.
Good morning, my name is Natalie Baer. I'm an intern with Jennifer, and I go to Johns Hopkins University as an undergraduate.
Sonny Guy, I'm with the Department of Defense.
Bill Poloshansky, also with Department of Defense.
Lisa Burtz, Department of Defense.
Some tribal behavior back there.
I'm Caitlin Werrell. I'm with Earth Day Network and also have a master's in water policy from Oxford.
I'm Roger Blobbaum. I'm an agricultural consultant specializing in organic agriculture, and I just returned from making a presentation at an organic seminar in Beijing.
I'm Michael Osborne with the Navy.
I'm Rachel Posner with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I work on our Global Water Futures project.
Martha Drosvich Holder. I do Environment and Water Resources at the World Bank.
And I'm Lyndon Ellis. I'm Jennifer Turner's assistant.
Okay, there's a heavy water focus out there, Chris. Can you handle it? All right. It's all yours, Chris. So again, that burning question, what is karst landscape, will be answered.
Can we bring in the lights just a little bit?
Sure.
There's a camera. Right. Well, thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here once again. I guess I'll get to this thing karst in just a moment. I do want to start with acknowledging, as Jennifer said, for our China Environmental Health Project, which started last October. I do want to acknowledge our primary sponsor is the U.S. Agency for International Development, and then we've also recently gotten significant funding through the Environ Foundation to extend the work. So I want to acknowledge them. And at the beginning, I guess one thing I would say is that I'm just, or we have just completed our first year of working for USAID, and I think it's 9:30 in Bangkok, where our bosses on the grant are, so I'm not sure if they're watching or not. But I wanted to comment that I guess kind of going into it, I don't know how wide the perception is, but I was kind of, there seems to be some perception, I guess, and there's something to it, the USAID, in terms of kind of as a, has a, like all agencies, a bureaucratic kind of culture, and that sometimes in the current world, I guess, seems intimidating. However, a really important thing is that I'd like to say about the agency, in my experience so far, having done it for a year, the bureaucracy is actually staffed by very warm, caring, and helpful people, and it's a very good thing. I've got a lot of experience with the Park Service, for instance, and it seems like people in national parks would sort of the people that gravitate towards that are people interested in the outdoors and such, and that's true to some degree. And from my experience at the agency, there's a lot of people who are interested in development and really sort of care about things in the world. So it's been a very, very positive experience, and I appreciate their support. Okay, well, to start with, I go around and give talks about our project and about karst and about China to various groups. And before I really talk about karst, I want to point out that we're talking and our work is focused in the Southwest. And one of the things that I'd like to kind of start off, I guess, really to highlight when discussing our constituency is that it's getting really hard to spend a day without picking up a Time magazine or listen to NPR when you don't hear something about the incredible juggernaut of the Chinese economy, how it's transforming the world, and this is certainly true. This is from last January, where Time magazine had a subtitle that says a new superpower has arrived. And this is true, but I like to point out that while this expansion, I'm not an economist, but I understand maybe unprecedented in the history of the world. Most of this is actually in the east, in the urban areas. So there's roughly 500 million people that are benefiting from this. But it turns out that there's another, I say 750 million here. I try not to exaggerate. The number's probably maybe 800 million. But just to be conservative, there's 700 and some million people that have yet to experience this economic expansion. And to some degree, these are our constituents in the Southwest and in this particular project. The poster child, the data that I've collected for this. I was in Beijing last December and stopped by a Starbucks which to me is the symbol, for the new China, I guess, in a way, and I mean that respectfully. And so I went into a Starbucks in Beijing to collect some data, and a large latte comes out to be 30 yuan, roughly $4 now, and and in fact they did have. I thought a large latte was a good kind of data point. You can in fact even spend a little bit more for a caramello kind of frappo something, but this is kind of our data point. And a week after that, I was in Chongqing province, and this could have been any number of villages. And it turns out in this particular one, that same 30 yuan is on the average 3 weeks of income for the people in this village. And so, and in fact, you could point out that, again, to be conservative, I just put 100 million. The number's probably a little higher, kind of at the 10th percentile. That there's a large number of people that, if we just use the Chinese poverty standard that's set at 680 yuan, that there's something more than 100 million people are living at that standard, and many of these people are in the Southwest. Of the area that we're working, essentially from Guangzhou across to Yunnan, the 7 provinces are many of the Chinese poorest, including Guizhou, which is the poorest in China. One thing I note, and this really isn't anything to make light of, but I did notice when I made this slide last year, 680 is still the poverty level. But last year when I made the slide when I was in China, it was $85. So the good news is now, in terms of the weak dollar, now these people have $91 per year. So, okay, getting to the point. A lot of people, even people that are knowledgeable about water in China, if you ask them where are the water access problems. Now, of course, there's water quality problems throughout China, but if you asked about the access, just the water quantity issues, where are they? As this map illustrates, many people would say in the north and the west, because that's where the arid climates are. In fact, this map, as it says, the kind of the purple areas, the bluer it is, the wetter it is, getting up through the yellow and into the red are the very dry areas. So the Southwest, with the problems that it does have, in both kind of economic and kind of water pollution problems, like other parts of China, a lot of people would not consider this a place of water access problems because it rains plenty there. Okay, there is a seasonal distribution of that water, but it's not generally thought of as a place with severe water quantity issues. However, throughout Southwest China, we have this karst thing, and this is what I'm going to focus on in this discussion for the moment. So here's the Southwest. These are some of the places where we've worked, and I'll talk about as we go along. But there's this karst region, and there are special problems with water supply, just access to water in these regions, even though it gets a good bit of rainfall. Okay, then to finally answer the question, the karst landscapes, with everybody is probably familiar, even if you hadn't heard the term, are areas like the Shenandoah Valley, not too far from here, if you've been to Luray Caverns on a field trip or something in school. Karst landscapes are those that are formed on types of bedrock which are soluble, which dissolve away in water, in particular with some CO2 in it, to be technical about it. And primarily, the dominant rock type is called limestone. And so we have extensive limestone areas all over the world. They dissolve away, and kind of as the picture suggests here, this is the one example, these form a kind of, I guess, what you could call a Swiss cheese-like landscape. And a point about this that I'll emphasize is that because of this, because the ground becomes so porous and so permeable with caves and all these voids underground, it means water can very easily go into the subsurface. And And so a major point about this is in areas of the world where you have this type of topography, there's very often problems with access to water at the surface. There can be plenty of water, but very often it's underground and not as accessible. So that's really the major point here. Okay, to kind of talk about karst a little bit generally here, globally karst landscapes have been estimated to cover some 15% of the land surface of the Earth. And more to the point, I guess, among people in this kind of business, is there's an estimate a few years ago that as many as 25% of the world's population gets water from karst aquifers or karst water systems. That's over 1 billion people. These landscapes are characterized, and I could spend a whole lecture just on this, but just a few features is, again, we have this hollowed out landscape. And so we have places where, for instance, here in western Guizhou, we have a relatively large river, and this is in the dry season, that's just apparently disappearing. Okay? It's not disappearing, it's sinking underground into this sort of dissolved out landscape. The water then flows underground. Caves are probably the most common or the most common features or the things that come to mind. This is in western Hunan, a very spectacular cave entrance here, and you can see that this underground, this water is underground inside the cave. And as I'll point out in a moment, that this is 600 feet below the surface. But the people, the 30,000 Miao folks that live there, they live on the surface, not in the cave. Or actually, there are a few that live in the cave as well, but mostly at the surface. Well, this is that same cave, a picture from the outside. And so the general point about karst is, another feature is that this water eventually comes back out. And so this comes at springs. In fact, many of the largest springs in the world are in fact karst springs, where these underground rivers have disappeared underground, flowed through caves below the surface, and then come back out. This particular picture, this is a fantastic place in Hunan, in the very far west, and the west of Hunan. And I mentioned before that the level of the river here, where this water is coming out, and this is in the wet season, by the way. The 600 feet above that, at the top of the plateau that's shrouded in mist up there, is, as I mentioned, a group of villages, about 30,000 folks, mostly Miao up there. And during the dry season, and I'll kind of mention that's a big issue here because of the climate. There's extensive periods of dry weather when water is not accessible to surface. And just for example, and there's so many that could be invoked here, that the people that live up kind of shrouded in the mist in this particular photo, during the dry season, there's many of them that walk as much as a mile or more across the plateau to the edge of this cliff, down 600 feet. There's a trail there that's not apparent in the picture, down to that cave. They get the water, and loaded with the water, they carry it back up and over to the village. Now, obviously, there's people around the world carrying water, but you can see this is a pretty spectacular example. The 600 feet from the cave up to the top, to get a sense of scale, the waterfall in this picture is 850 feet tall. Okay, that's almost twice as tall as the Washington Monument. So when you head out today and kind of take a look up there, and you can kind of get a sense of this. So the point is that this is the kind of terrain in this particular case. This isn't a spectacular example, but people are carrying the water up from the cave up there, and this is not just at least in dry periods that they're drinking. This is everything that they're using, and I won't kind of dwell on this point, but something I'm very mindful of is that there's the poverty in this case in the Southwest is in these cases very closely tied to the physical environment, and in part if you're spending a couple hours a day carrying water, which some of the people in these communities do in the dry season, during that time you're not generating an income, you're not spending it with your kids, you're not in school, and any number of things that you might be doing in addition to whatever physical problems, injuries. Okay, well, because again, this is back to Guizhou in the Liupang Shui area. Because the water is in the subsurface, it's not at the surface. And as I mentioned, there's the monsoon climate throughout the Southwest, throughout much of China. means that there's plenty of rain. In fact, the rain in much of these area exceeds that of here in Washington, at least kind of equals and exceeds in many cases. But the problem is a lot of it comes within a relatively short rainy season in the summer. And so that means that there's sometimes 7 or maybe more months, even in normal years, it's a sort of typical situation where maybe only, say, 30% of the rainfall of the year is spread out over more than half the year. So it gets very dry, and a very typical kind of scene here where for miles and miles and miles there just is very limited water at the surface, and it's just a big problem. Now, kind of get past that one. One of the things that people ask is that, well, if these villages are here and it's miles from water, why in the world would anyone live there? Right? Well, it's very closely tied to, a very complex social and political and economic issues, again, tied to the physical landscape. The short story is, and this is something I'm becoming very fascinated in learning about, is that these areas back kind of historically, way back, this is a subtropical climate, so even with the dry season, back in time, these were areas with relatively lush vegetation, good thick soils, and what would happen is that in these karst areas, you have a zone, and I won't go into too much technical geology here, but let me just say, around the interface between the limestone and the soil, where you have good thick soils and vegetation, there's a shallow kind of water storage zone, like I think of it like a sponge. It's technically called the epikarstic zone. And when you have this, which is very common in vegetated karst areas, then what happened for decades, if not centuries, is that during the wet season, the sponge would soak up water, and then small springs on these hillsides would leak out and could sustain through the dry season. And except for in drought years, there was a good supply of water because of this shallow storage. It's perfectly natural. Well, unfortunately, in the late 1950s, as many of you are aware, there was massive deforestation in China and throughout China. And with the vegetation gone, in these steep slopes in the karst areas, the soil was washed away. And so we have thousands and thousands of square miles that look like this. Where the soil is essentially gone. This is after years of developing the soils. This is in Chongqing. And in fact, the farmer, as we went by, she shouted out, "Why don't you stop and give me a hand here?" But one thing you see is that these are very, very careful farmers. And I've just sort of found this in general, in my experiences in rural China. And you see, for one thing, that big pile of kind of organic material there. So they're working to develop and kind of enrich the soils here. So there's certainly some soil here, but this is after year of effort of trying to get this stuff here. One thing that I'm looking into now is that almost like, for those who've been around for a while, you kind of hear, well, where were you when JFK got shot? Or for the younger people, where were you when the Challenger exploded? Well, it's in the Southwest. I'm coming across this idea, well, where were you in 1958 when we started cutting all the trees? Because in the karst areas, in a lot of cases, this meant that this is when we started having water problems with these springs that formerly had been a nice supply. Now, once that happened, then the other question is, well, why don't you move somewhere else? Well, in rural China, for one thing, is if you're living on 680 yuan a year, one obvious thing is, well, it's not like we'll stay at the Holiday Inn till the house is ready. And the other thing is, if there's a good place to move to, there's already somebody living there essentially, or growing. So it's a complex, but you don't just pick up and move villages with kind of, it's not a trivial situation. Okay, so back to karst a little bit. I want to point out that Asia, I like to point out, has some beautiful, beautiful karst areas, and this actually has a positive attribute because there's areas that otherwise have limited economic potential, but have tourism development. And Vietnam has beautiful ones. These are throughout Ha Long Bay, a wonderful World Heritage Site on the northeast coast of Vietnam. Krabi, southwest Thailand, unfortunately impacted by the tsunami in this area, but this picture was taken before the tsunami. But beautiful karst landscapes down there. And then what I think is probably the most widely distributed picture of karst in the history of the world. For those of you who've been to China, you at least at one time probably had one of these pictures in your pocket. And this is, of course, the back of the 20 yuan note and the famous Li River near Guilin in Guangxi. And certainly one of the kind of China's, as far as I know, most visited tourist spots, and according to some people, including poets, reputed as China's most beautiful place. However, I would point out, and I love Guilin, and it certainly is a beautiful place, but with 500,000 square kilometers of karst, there's a lot of beautiful places with this kind of landscape throughout China. Okay, so if we focus now in the southwest China karst, this is in Guangxi. This area, more or less contiguous, I'll show you a map in a second, covers about 500,000 square kilometers. Monsoon climate, as I said, this is the same location in August in one picture and February in the other. Depending on how you count, maybe as many as 100 million, mostly rural folks in the area. And as I said, if we kind of take the 10% percentile is roughly, well, it's set at 680. The poverty level, which is something under $100 per year. There's a map of it. The white areas are the kind of the limestone areas. So you can see there's kind of Changshan, Hunan to the east, Guangzhou you can see, and then as far west as you can see Chengdu and Chongqing. Of course, Yunnan down to the lower left. Note that Guiyang, the capital Guizhou, is kind of right in the middle of the big white blob, and as I mentioned before, Guizhou is the poorest province in China, but wonderful landscapes. They are making some headway in tourism development. Another problem is with this landscape; it's so rugged. In many cases, it's difficult to have transportation infrastructure as well, and that's certainly a problem in Guizhou. Okay, well, I want to kind of lead up to what we're doing in the grant and then hand off to Amelia here. A little bit of the history, very briefly, is that, as Jennifer said, my colleagues and I have been working in China for the last 12 years. It turns out at our university, Western Kentucky University, in our department, we have a long interest in karst for really 20 years, myself and other people. Mammoth Cave National Park, with the largest cave in the world, is 35 miles up the road, so we have many students do theses, and it's a very good laboratory for us. So there's a lot of interest in this. And without going too much into the history, I had a chance to visit Guilin in 1995 and met my friend and colleague, Professor Yuan Daoxian, and who is widely regarded as the expert, you know, the sort of the whatever you would say about it, but the top expert in China, who ran something called the Karst Dynamics Laboratory at the Institute of Karst Geology, which is in Guilin. And so we started a collaboration, and for many years we worked on projects such as this particular one near Guilin, and we looked at various what I would call basic research or academic questions to do with geochemistry. Why do the landscapes look a certain way there in southwest China and different in Kentucky, you know, things like that. And but what happened through the years is that my colleagues and I and my students, and part of this I'm motivated to just to be there because I love it and get students there and do this work and just kind of experience that part of China. But what was happening to me personally, and I think my colleagues, was that we would drive someplace and kind of hike through these villages to get to some cave somewhere, meeting people and sharing meals and just really having very nice experiences. And it really became clear the challenges that these people were meeting or experiencing. And what happened was that it kind of, although my colleagues and I are still interested in this kind of research and still do it, there was a certain irony, I guess you might say, in that we were collecting some water sample to find out some relatively obscure fact about carbon dioxide or something, when the same resources that we were using in terms of coming to China, getting students there, equipment, whatever it was, and training. It just seemed like there was a compulsion to think about turning this towards using the same knowledge and the same resources to try to improve quality of life. And obviously, it's a huge task there. Any of us will just have the smallest impact. But with discussions with Professor Yuan and others, we kind of started turning towards more applied studies, and still with the opportunity to get students there and do our work, but really started thinking very much about how to make an impact into the quality of life just to the extent possible. So so we had a couple of opportunities. We started working towards this, and in 2004. We worked on a project with our colleagues in Guilin at the Karst Institute, and this is one example of the type of water resource projects that are done in the Karst. This is the place I mentioned in Hunan with the Miao communities up at the top of the plateau there. The cave there is called Dalantong, or Big Dragon Cave. And what happened was that there's actually a dam you can see inside the cave. In fact, there, that yellow spot is one of our team. So these are pretty big caves, by the way. They have a dam inside the cave that's about 100 yards upstream from that big waterfall that they divert water for electric power at the bottom. What they're doing now, and what they started that time, was designing a dam to completely block the entire passage. This passage is as wide as a football field, is long in some places. These are huge caves, which is one of the reasons my students and I like to go there. And so, but they're in progress of building this dam, and the idea is inside the cave to totally block the flow, back up the water behind the dam, and to get water. If they're ultimately completely successful with the whole project, water would be closer to being available up on the plateau. It would also have increased electric generation for economic development in the area. Also, there's some measure of flood control. Our colleagues in Guilin were assisting them with geological work. They called us for some relatively highly technical work to help with the engineers in terms of surveying the cave, including some cave diving and going down some big pits on the top of the plateau and such. But the nice thing was that we're still going into caves, mapping caves, and experiencing this, but it really was. If they're ultimately successful, and they're actually supposed to start on the dam. I was there just in the summer, and when it quits raining this year, which it actually should be any time, if it hasn't already there, they're going to actually start building the dam. Okay, not long after that, we had another project that was really not a water resource project, but it was a bit of serendipity where a commercial cave in Hunan, in eastern Hunan, near Chenzhou, had contacted our colleagues, and I think what had happened was when our teams were at Dalangdong, one thing that happens on these trips is they're big media events. There's always somebody with a camera as people are coming out of the cave, and this actually got on a CCTV one night. And I think that the people, I'm not sure of this, but I think
that's
the people...
why you do this work, right? You want to make TV shows.
Well, in fact, I was able to say to the PR people at the university that with 1.3 billion potential customers, this was their best PR opportunity in the history of the university. They didn't get a raise or anything, but I can at least comment. And I haven't got any movie contracts yet from Jackie Chan. So, but what happened in this case, for whatever reason, but I suspect what happened was that the people that run this cave saw there was all this PR with what they call the Wagwaren scientists, the foreigners showing up. And so they invited the team to come to their cave, and subsequently there was lots of PR activity there. And the idea was to explore new parts of the cave to help them develop increase their tourism. And we made some kind of scientific interpretations, for the tourism. But we took it as a chance to work with our colleagues to help train them in cave surveying and various hydrologic methods. Okay. Finally, one thing led to the other, and I'm happy to say, with the support of U.S. Agency for International Development, I should also acknowledge that this was made possible through the support of Senator Mitch McConnell, who's the senior senator for Kentucky, so many of you know. Last October, we started this project. This installment of funding is for 2 years, so we're right at the end of year one, going through the September, and then with additional funding from the Environment Foundation. And we're focusing on water today, but I want to point out that we also have a component looking at air quality. These are based on university partnerships, as you'll see, and along with our program, which I'll talk about briefly, we also have a partnership with my colleagues at the university who are coal chemists with the Anhui University of Science and Technology, looking at coal combustion issues in public health. And then we also have a kind of an outreach, what we call a knowledge management program And I'm very pleased to say my two lovely colleagues here at the table are the, yes indeed, my three lovely colleagues, please excuse me. We've met by email for a long time. We're meeting in person for the first time today. Are the major cogs of that wheel, and Amelia will fill in there. So the main, what's happened is in the kind of the middle background is Professor Yuan, and although we worked in his institute in Guilin for many years, he has recently started a new institute, which is at Southwestern University in Chongqing municipality in a town called Beibei. And so he still kind of works in both places, but it just turned out by the time that the smoke cleared, we partnered with Southwest, the School of Geography there. Very good situation, a lot of expertise. Now, what we're doing is, in general, what we're trying to do is ultimately improve quality of life, and we're doing this through two ways. One is with actual demonstration projects that I'll mention, and but more important than that, I think, is through actual site work. You can certainly make a difference, but it's not practical to say, well, we're going to start at one end. We're going to start in Guangzhou and just kind of, or Guangdong, and just kind of march across China, solving all the problems. That's not going to happen. So we like to. Our model is to really kind of think about a more sustainable view by doing demonstration projects, but primarily as a training vehicle for our colleagues. So we're providing training, setting up laboratories, working joint projects with our colleagues. And a point, and this is a really good example of this, is that this is obvious, I guess, those of you that work in China, but the Chinese scientists, our colleagues, and just in general, are very good scientists, just as capable, as anyone else in every way, except for access to state-of-the-art information. Until recently, there was a problem with even scientific literature. Now with the internet, that's getting easier. Because of the economy of scale, if it costs $3,500 for 12 issues of a journal, which is not uncommon, in a library subscription, well, in China, that's quite a bit of money at a university. So there was choices of personnel or journals, and just for example. So what we're really trying to do is work with the scientists and the students to bring in state-of-the-art technology. And part of the problem is that in the karst world, the fact that only a few people here have heard of it, this is a relatively obscure field, and the relatively specialized methods it takes to study are really not widely disseminated, and certainly in China. An example is, this is in southern Yunnan, and this river is flowing along. This is a limestone floored valley, and I put some arrows. You can't see the stream there very well, but it's flowing towards the camera at the end of this valley. And this is the same spot, but turning around, looking the other way. So the stream is now flowing on the right-hand side and curves around. And you see that the arrow over there just kind of ends at the end of that valley. Well, this is a very typical situation because this is where the surface stream disappears underground into a cave. The next place that comes out is over 30 kilometers away. And the top of that plateau, in this case with Yi and Miao, is a very dry area, and this is one of the areas where we're working. Well, the reason I'm invoking this is that one of the things that's commonly done in this kind of business is to trace the water. Okay, part of this is done by actually going into the caves and mapping them out. But one of the things we often do is put substances. Commonly, we use fluorescent dyes, where you put dye in the water, and using kind of various technology, you see where the dye came out some distance away, and so you can actually map out the underground rivers using this tracing technology, and we use it a lot. It's arguably the most important kind of technical method that we use, and certainly one of them. Now, the Chinese tracing water it's an obvious thing to do in these settings, and they were very interested in this. Well, they did a trace in this particular case that my colleagues described, where this is some years ago, but they used rock salt, and rock salt it makes the water salty, and you can measure that pretty easily, so you can see when the salt comes through. Well, the point is that this trace used 26,000 pounds of salt. We can drive there now. At the time, it was 5 miles. It was as close as you could get a truck to where this river sinks underground, and they had an estimated 300 people carry 26,000 pounds of salt to dump into this hole. Okay. Well, the trace was successful. They found where it came out. But obviously not the most efficient method for doing this. And I talked to one of my colleagues and I said, dude, we can do this with 5 pounds of dye that I can carry in this backpack that I have on right now. And so, which started a conversation that we're still involved in. I can't help but say that one of my colleagues that was describing this trace of having 300, an estimated 300 people carry the salt across this landscape, turned to me and said, when you have a job like that to do, it's a good day to be living in a communist country. So I thought, well, yeah, good point. So we continue to work and continue to learn. So anyway, so one of the things we're doing now, for example, is we're providing training in state-of-the-art methods for doing this tracing. There's some dye being injected. That's fluorescein dye, the same stuff that's in antifreeze. That you may have seen that kind of bizarre green color. We've also there's my colleague Priscilla Baker, and one of our Chinese colleagues actually runs the lab. The instrument there is something we installed in October called a spectrofluorophotometer, and the main point is you can measure dye with it in very, very, very small concentrations, parts per trillion. And so now we are training them in state-of-the-art methods for this underground tracing, for example, them and the students. The grant we've gotten from Environ is to actually help Southwest University develop training materials to in turn train officials, hydrogeology officials, and government officials in Yunnan province that have responsibility for studying the karst areas and for making decisions about how water resources are managed. So we're working to train the trainers at Southwest to provide materials and training to folks in Yunnan. We're ultimately using that as a template as we move forward. Our hope and plan is to use that those sets of materials as a template to then work with Southwest University to provide training to officials in Guangxi, Hunan, Hubei, Yunnan, across the Southwest. And my dream is, among other things, to increase the academic infrastructure for people in the Southwest with responsibility for karst water resources. So this is what we're trying to do with, I'd like to think, some success so far. The other things that we're training, the other thing I mentioned is you can go into the caves and actually map out the rivers, and this is very important as well, to the extent you can. So we're, although it seems kind of strange, we're training on how to go into caves without breaking your neck, how to kind of map things. Part of the problem is that the water in China, in these karst areas, when I mentioned the plateau where that, where the salt went, by the time you get deep into that plateau, or across that plateau, the water table is 1,400 feet below the surface, and so these are very deep, sometimes deeper than that. That also means to get around in the caves. I'm serious, about making sure not to break your neck. One of the things that you have to learn is how to get up and down ropes safely and sort of negotiate all that. So we had that training. It turned out that the one of the days that we had the rope training there, this is at the university, the new director of the Regional Development Mission for Asia of USAID was making his first visit to China. He just started his job last year and was making a visit to the ambassador to China, and wanted to make a site visit for USAID, and he happened to show up the day that all these people were dangling from ropes off the sides of buildings, but he was amenable once it was explained what was happening. Another major thing that we're doing is technology called geographic information systems, and this is computer technology for spatial, for maps essentially, for spatial analysis. There is GIS in China. Again, the state-of-the-art methods are kind of making their way there. We've set up a small, yet again, state-of-the-art laboratory at Southwest University in the geography school, and had several training workshops. There's 5 computers there now. The university is going to match that with another 20, so we'll have a 25-seat computer laboratory for this work. Just to explain kind of one example of GIS that was particularly powerful, you see Shidong at the lower right-hand side. That's the cave where they dump the salt, and you can see across the plateau where the blue lines is where the streams are, and you see up on the plateau what's called East Plateau off to the right. There essentially are no blue streams because there are no streams up there. It's in the subsurface, and so one kind of interesting example here is when we had the first visit, the first field visit. This is in down close to the border of Vietnam in Yunnan. we had the site visit there, and in fact, I went to the U.S. Embassy to brief the State Department about, or actually, I'm sorry, USAID in Bangkok to brief the project. Then we went to the field, and then I was scheduled to go back to Beijing to brief the State Department about the project. And the reason I mention this is that we gathered information. This is the first time that we were getting, in fact, met Amelia down there. The first time we're in the field, I gathered up some information, some maps, emailed them. From China back to Virginia to a GIS guy that we're working with on the program, and I said, can you make a map that looks like this, like this? He sent it back the next day. I made some revisions, sent it back, and by the time I got to Beijing, I had this map within 3 days of being the first time in the field to help them explain the situation. So it really kind of shows the power of this technology, and there's a lot more where that comes from. So where are we? We're continuing. We're at the end of the first year. I'm happy to say that the two major laboratories, the GIS lab and the dye tracing lab, are set up. We've had a number of workshops, 2 field workshops in dye tracing, along with the ropes and kind of the survey workshops. We've had one major expedition down in Yunnan, and Amelia's going to pick that up a little bit, to Mongsa, where we went down to East Plateau and on to try to get down to find the river there with Chinese people, with folks from Southwest. And there's another one that's going to be going back early next year. This has to be done during the dry season, obviously, so that kind of controls the schedule. And then most recently, we completed a workshop. This was about 3 weeks ago. We had actual sections for graduate students, specialized ones. About 40 people showed up, and then we had a series of ones that were open to the undergraduate population. This is about 200 people in this room, where we had karst experts from both the U.S., China, and Europe. So. And I think I'll hand over at that point. I want to leave, and in fact, I'll go ahead and say this in English. Amelia's Chinese is much better than mine, which is growing slowly. But Amelia was at the workshop in Chongqing that we did, and as you'll see, there's a social science component. As those of us that kind of started this kind of went into it thinking of the rocks and the caves and the water, and we realized there was people involved here, and that's very much what we've moved towards, particularly getting involved with USAID. And there, so Amelia and Jennifer and Lyndon kind of bring a social science component to this, which you'll hear about. And Amelia talked about her work at the workshop, and she kind of ended her talk there with I guess, exhortation to us to have the brain of a scientist but the heart of a missionary. And this is very much what we're trying to do. So.
And how do you say that in Chinese?
科学家的鸟带
Okay, good.
Roughly speaking, if there's any Chinese people, please excuse me. So, 我的中文不是好.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Well, let's thank Chris first. And I have to admit that, actually, as he was talking, while she's getting her PowerPoint up, I actually remembered Chris. When I was 8 years old, my grandfather bought me a little geology kit. I wanted to be a geologist for the longest time. I don't know what happened. But now I'm listening, I'm like, oh, wow. I mean, rocks, they're cool. So Amelia's going to get hers up. And so, yeah, as Chris mentioned, that Amelia, Lyndon, and I are the kind of the outreach kind of component of this project. She gets to do the fun stuff because she gets to be in the field. We're here in D.C., but I'll talk about more what we do, but so you get to hear the fun stuff about the outreach component because she's there. Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Amelia Chung, and I'm here on behalf of the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction. And as you have heard from Chris, we are responsible for the community outreach component, or what they call at USAID the knowledge sharing, knowledge management and information sharing component.
We've learned a new vocabulary.
But in our vocabulary, it's more community outreach, and also I add the term engagement. So I'm going to talk more about the social science aspect of what we do for this project. So we'll have to shift gear a little bit after Chris presented his part. And I hope I won't disappoint people who are interested in water. I'm still on the topic of water, but we're going to talk about water and people who need them for our everyday life. So this project is basically a scientific research, so focusing on hydrogeology, but at the same time in China and in the rural communities areas in China, people are everywhere. And there's the social science aspect that we cannot omit if we're in other countries. So I would just like to, first emphasize or, talk about why the importance of the social science aspect. I think everyone knows, but I would like to explain it more a little bit in terms of the characteristics of solutions for development, especially for rural communities in the developing countries. For example, in this case, we would like to find solution to clean water. And there's the natural science component and there's technology that we can, help bring the solution. But we cannot forget that there's the local knowledge, which we mean indigenous knowledge and practices by the local people. And there's this local situation that outsiders may not have information about. For example, resources available and mobilizing the local resources. All these need to add to the natural science and technology aspects in order to find a solution to clean water. And this solution will then be applicable, affordable, and sustainable. So we're talking about community outreach and engagement. Outreach, to us, is not enough. We're not just disseminating information to people and letting them know of our solutions. We need them to participate, and we engage them from the beginning on of the project. And participation is important, especially for the poor in rural communities, because the poor has a culture of silence. They have muted voices, they do not have access to resources, and most of the time they do not participate in the development process. And that's why we add this component in to our project, which ultimately, when we do research on the geological aspect of the areas, we also would like to achieve the ultimate objective of improving the living standard of the local people. So as an NGO and a development NGO, the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction, our role in this project, first of all, we need to familiarize our partners on concepts of community participation and mobilization. Most of our partners are university researchers in the scientific aspects, and they may not have experiences working with communities, and they may not see the importance of engaging them. So I think this is a very important point that we need to, first of all, familiarize them on these concepts. And also our roles, we have to assess the training needs and conduct training workshop. And this is for our Chinese NGO partners in the sense that their capacities in engaging communities we would like to increase so that the project can be sustainable, and they will be the long-term partner to work with the communities, not us, an international organization, or our university scientists. And lastly, we design, plan, and implement the community outreach and engagement activities with our local partners. That's basically our role for this project. So Chris shared with you a map of China, where are the dry areas, the wet areas, and I will just focus on Yunnan. This is a Yunnan map, and as you can see in the middle is Kunming. That's the capital of the province, Yunnan province. And our project site, Chris mentioned, is Mengzi. It's actually belongs to Honghe Prefecture of the province, and you can see that it's on the south east of Kunming. And then there's the city called He Khou. That's the border town of Vietnam and China. So that Mông Tzu is between Kunming and this border to the Vietnam. And the distance from Mông Tzu to Kunming is about 289 kilometers, and to the border is about 160 kilometers. Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this area in terms of who lives there and such. So this prefecture that I talk about, Mông Tzu, is actually in the Honghe prefecture, and it's an autonomous prefecture. It's mainly inhabited by Hani and Yi, the two ethnic minority groups. The Hani inhabits mainly in the southwest of the prefecture, Yi in other areas. And Hani, I don't know if you know about this group, but their dances and music are very famous and popular. They both are included in the Chinese national list of cultural heritage. But in our project site, which is Mông Tzu County, it's the Yi minority that dominates. The total population of this county is 390,000, and more than half of them are minorities, and Yi people are the primary ethnic group there. It actually was also the earliest settlement in this area, which it shapes the region's history. I've learned that Mông Tzu, the term, the place name is actually Yi language. And it's also, it means the place that consumes dry crops. So maybe that's, it gives rise to how the physical environment is like over there. Well, a little bit about Yi. The Yi minority has three groups, sub-tribes in this region, and they have different languages and cultures. And they are spread out across the county. So once again, the map that Chris showed you with the rivers, you see the blue lines showing you where the water is, and I'm going to show you where the communities are to let you know what are the relationships over there. So in order to let you know more about this area and the people who live there and how are their conditions with respect to water, I think I will take you on a trip with us to go through the village number 1, number 2, and number 3, and show you pictures of each community. So first of all, we started the day with the first village. This was actually a field trip we did in March with the expedition team and Chris and other project team members. So this first village is called Lao Yang Cao Tang Village. It's located on the plateau, where Chris was talking about the East Plateau. And it has 10 villages. If the 10 villages form the administrative village in the region with population of 3,000. And we stopped by one of these 10 villages. The people over there, they grow tobacco, corn, and sweet potatoes. They don't have problems with food and shelters, but the per capita income is 1,200 yuan, which is still above the 680 poverty line, but they are still looking for ways to improve their lives, and to them, they are still trapped in this impoverished condition. Because they don't have tap water, one of the 2 villages, we visited we visited this village, and this village is one of the 2 villages that does not have tap water out of the 10 villages. In the households, usually they will have these cisterns, which we show on this picture. It's built by some funding from the government, and the villages have to pay for about 3/4 of the cost, of the total cost. And these cisterns are used to hold and store rainwater that they can collect during rainy season. And not every household has this cistern. if they cannot afford it, they would not be able to have it in their house. And the closest water source is a small reservoir with muddy water that we can see the children are playing with it, and it's not far away. It's only 5 minutes away, but as we can see, there are still villages that have to carry water buckets to carry water back to the house for their daily consumption. And we asked that this task is not only limited to women or men. They share the responsibilities. And the next stop we made after stopping on this first village is called Chibudi settlement. This represents an area which is relatively dry, and they have scattered holes that the water flows into the underground. This used to have water around, again, the year 1958, magical year. But area has been dry ever since, according to the older villages. And because of the limitation of water access, the villagers, most of them, they're not engaged with agriculture activities. And in fact, we've met, when we were visiting, we've met young people, young villagers that are just idle and they don't have any work to do. And we talked to them and found out that they are the surplus labor force in the village. Although there are no activities in the village, or the production activities in the village, they do not want to go to their surrounding towns or cities to work, like many migrant workers nowadays in the rural villages in China, because they love their homelands and they want to stay and contribute, to the development of their homelands. And without water, they seem to have no choices but to wait. And then we drove for another half an hour, and we reached to the third village, which is next to Shidong, where Chris was talking about, where there's surface water and with the arrows, and then it eventually goes into the mountain where the surface water becomes the underground water. Actually, that's almost like the same picture on the left, where the water is coming into the camera. And this village is called Shidong Village, and it represents a cluster of settlements in an area where there's surface water for living and irrigation. And because there's relatively more assets to water, this village is better off in terms of living condition and prosperity compared to the previous two that we visited along our route. So villagers told us that they grew enough food for their own consumption, at the same time that they have a large area of land reserved to grow cash crops, mainly tobacco, and their per capita income is 6,000 yuan, RMB, which is like 5 times than the first village we stopped and visited. And the villagers over there, they farm in summer and they work somewhere else in winter. So this 3 villages represent the range of living conditions because of the different physical environment that they are surrounded by. And during this visit, we got a sense of how water is affecting the daily lives of people, and how that has a role to play in poverty. And after that, we come back and then we think about what we can do about improving their living standards as to contributing to achieving the objective of this project. And we definitely have to have them to play a role and play a part in this project. And in order to engage them throughout the project implementation, we'll have to do a lot of participatory approaches, a participatory the work, and the tools that we use, they are called participatory rule appraisal and participatory learning and action. They are both very effective ways to engage communities, and not just to let them know what's going on, one-way direction, one-way communication, but we would like to learn both as outsiders and the insiders can learn their own situations and to better know the needs of the communities in terms of development, so that our solutions in terms of water issues and the quality of water can be solved that address the needs. And besides the tools of participatory approaches, we can also conduct focus group discussions and multi-stakeholders dialogues and technical work team meetings, etc. It depends on at which stage we are in the project implementation, and as the key stakeholder, the communities will be mainly it will play a very important role in all these activities, and eventually we will achieve shared situation analysis where the communities will learn their own needs, while the project implementers can use this information to propose the corresponding solution. And we'll do joint planning, and we will do baseline and other types of data collection. And participatory approaches can also help us to do project progress monitoring and evaluation. And most importantly, outsiders, in this case, we can only act as facilitators. That's what participatory approaches mean. In order to have the communities to have ownerships and to bring changes to their own communities, they will be the managers of the project, not us. And the outsiders, we will be the facilitator of this change. And as I said a while earlier, we are going to assess the training needs and conduct a workshop focusing on the local Chinese partner. The reason of doing so is to ensure the project can be sustainable after it completes, and we will have long-lasting effect even though the project ends. And while Chris and his team is doing other technical workshops, training the local partner, the university teachers and faculty, students on the rope techniques and other technical skills.
You're not going to get that?
No. we are focusing on the social science training, and it works similarly, that we would like to have a local partner that's focused on social science aspect, and ideally they will be based in the region, in specifically Mengzi, so that, well, first of all, they know the local situation much better than us, the project team here, and they have a closer relationship with the local communities, and in this case, the minorities, because of their special cultures and their uniqueness, it's important to have a local partner rather than someone from outside to interact directly with them. And that is why we bring in a local partner, and our role is to build their capacities, and eventually they can have enhanced capacities to work with the local communities in the years to come. So we have identified this local NGO partner, and its name is Honghe Prefecture Nationality and Studies Institute. It was established in 1984, and the technical supervisory agency of this institute is the Yunnan Academy of Social Science since 1992. So they can consider them a branch of the Yunnan Academy of Social Science, but they are based in Mengzi and very familiar with the Honghe Prefecture. And the government wise, they also have a supervisory agency, and it's the Prefecture Civil Affairs Bureau. So theoretically, this is a government-organized NGO. Its main activities include doing research, restoration, translation, and compilation of classical books and manuscripts, editing and publishing reading and teaching materials in Chinese and also the local minority languages. And also, finally, they conduct surveys, studies on traditional cultures, socioeconomic and development issues of the prefecture. So what they will do, what this local partner will do for this project will be, first of all, they need to participate in our training, the one facilitated by IRR, to enhance the capacities in community mobilization. Although they have worked with communities all along, in different areas of their jobs in the local areas, we think that their capacities can be enhanced and they can contextualize what they learn in the local settings. And the second responsibility is that they will undertake community engagement activities during different project stages with the project team. And finally, they will provide linkage and liaison between the project team and the local communities of concern. And these are their roles. And we are about to start this partnership and begin our work with them very soon. And we hope to be able to report our progresses next year, hopefully, about the actual work that we do with engaging the communities. And lastly, I'd just like to briefly introduce you to our institute. Maybe not many of you have heard of us before, but we are an international development NGO. We were established actually over 40 years, established in 1967. Our headquarters is in the Philippines. We're one of the few development NGO that are based in the global south. We have regional programs in Asia and Africa. And we have an U.S. office in New York. It's for liaison and fundraising. And a history that of our institute, although we're international, we have roots in China because our founder is a Chinese. His name is Dr. James Yan, and he was the pioneer in China's rural reconstruction and mass education movements in early 1920s, and that's why we can see our logo is a Chinese pin. It represents two different levels, one for peace and the individual level is tranquility. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, the history of his work is he set up an experimental site, or what he calls social laboratory, in the rural county of Hebei province in northern China. And later he established IRR in the Philippines. But our China office has just returned officially 3 years ago, and we would like to contribute to the rural development of China. And finally, our mission, we commit to enable the poor and the organizations to release their full potential to overcome poverty by applying participatory approaches, which I was describing. We develop capacity and sharing knowledge. IR works with communities, the organizations, and other development actors to enable them to affect meaningful change toward better livelihoods, sustainable development, gender equality, increased civic engagement, and improved health and education. So that ends my presentation, and I welcome any questions you have. Thank you for your attention.
Mayu, can you push the top button to get the lights up out there? Just want to add quickly, I don't have a PowerPoint, but just so you know, the fourth piece in terms of the coal, they'll be coming here and speaking in April. But in terms of what the China Environment Forum does, I mean, as you see, we are a meeting machine, so we do have the China Environmental Health Project folks come in and talk, but also those of you that have been coming more regularly this last year may have noticed that almost all of our meetings, we've had some kind of health component to it, if possible. We were tasked under this grant to not only put on environmental health meetings, but also focus on public participation in the spirit of like IIRR, the idea that if you are going to improve environmental health issues in China, the public has to be involved. And we're also, the new China Environment Series goes to layout. It's going to be out very soon. And it all focuses on, we're very tired editors here, it focuses almost exclusively on environmental health issues more broadly. We're trying not to just put, I think we are putting karst water issues in China on the map. A lot of people, you guys all, who knows what karst means now? You can all raise your hands, right? Yay, this room, another 30 people know. But that also that we've been tasked to try to just raise the issue of environmental health more generally, because those of you that work in China know this has been a missing piece in China. And there are a lot of statistics being thrown out there, how many people are dying early from respiratory illnesses and whatnot, but we're trying to really push out that kind of information so that for the policymakers to really kind of maybe even prioritize it even greater. Okay, I want to open it up for some Q&A now. And my interns, wave their hands, have microphones, and because we are on the web, you do need to speak into the microphone. If you don't mind, when you ask the question, just say your name again so we know who you are. Okay, some questions, comments. How about go to Francis Lee first?
My question is for Chris, who's sitting behind the wrong name tag. Francis Lee from NSF. This may sound frivolous, but it may be important. You mentioned the 2,600 pounds of salt that were dropped into the river to trace it. Isn't that going to affect the water quality? And didn't the researchers think about that?
It's not frivolous at all, and I didn't mention that, but there's certainly in this work there is I guess kind of an ecological component. It's not, we're focusing on people, but we're very mindful that there's always an ecological component. In this particular case, you're exactly right, and the term I've been using is ecologically questionable. In terms of that, and in fact, that came up in the grant proposal to Environ to provide this training. That was one of the motivations we were looking at, because the dyes that we're using. One of the things about the machine, the laboratory we're setting up, is those dyes can be analyzed in 100 parts per trillion, and so these are environmentally safe. That's one of the properties of the dyes that we select. And so I'd say in terms of so it is. You're exactly right. And in karst areas, one of the things that I didn't focus on is that in the caves, including in China, in fact, generally speaking, there's I don't know what word to put on it. I guess unique, for lack of a better word. I mean, there's particularly evolved ecosystems that live in the caves. There's fish with no eyes, and these various things that are relatively rare. There are species that are endemic to a single cave. That's certainly known here in the U.S. In China, that's a largely unknown. There has been very limited survey in kind of the ecological conditions underground in China, but there's no reason to think it's not just as rich as anywhere else, and so that's very much a concern. In terms of the kind of the scientists at the time they were doing it, this was some years ago, and I think my guess would be that it was just more kind of pragmatic, that they. That it just wasn't necessarily in terms of what they were trying to do. They may have thought about it, but I can't speak to them or for them. But I think it was just that it probably did not factor heavily into their thinking. My guess is. So I'm not sure if the 300 guys were thinking that as they carried the salt or not. So. Well, yeah, at a minimum, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Rachel.
You're exactly right.
Natalie, Rachel, right there.
I have a question for Chris as well, but Amelia might also be able to answer. You were talking about building a dam in this underground cave. Was there any type of pushback? Because it can be really controversial with the community. Where I don't know, maybe when you were in these meetings facilitating discussions with local people, are they upset? Are they glad that this is happening? What's been their response, and has there been any type of strategic environmental assessment about the impact of that dam on the community on the long term?
Another good question. Certainly with regard to dams in China, this is happening kind of in general, but in this particular case, having, from my experience, primarily dealing with the geologists and the engineers, I'm not aware of any such activities there. Why, I'm not sure. I would say a couple reasons. One is, again, this kind of pragmatism where people are, these are areas that, in fact, the community around where that dam is not kind of the people that the plateau is has very severe economic challenges. The city downstream, Jishou, is kind of relatively prosperous, and so in fact they will receive a lot of the benefits in terms of increased electricity generation and the economic benefits that flow from that. So I think that part of it may be, when I'm just really speculating, part of it may be the fact that it's underground. It's hidden away. People just like to fish. People don't think about it. That's something that tends to pervade kind of karst issues. And I've worked around the world dealing with karst, and one of the things is this idea in Kentucky, people throw dead cows into sinkholes because they used to, but when they wash away down into the cave during the rain, they cease to exist, even though the water supply may be just downstream from there. But that's something that kind of pervades cultures, in this idea that what at least in the karst world, what you can't see in front of you, it becomes kind of abstract, I guess you might say. I guess the other thing is that while there's ecological, where there's dams, and in fact I'll point at World Bank. I have some colleagues that are looking at ecological evaluation of a dam project in a karst area that's funded by World Bank. When it's on the surface, it's in your face, and so or more apparent. There's species and there's forests that would get flooded and et cetera. But what's underground, if there's endangered species, who even knows about it? So I think in that case, it's just kind of a practical concern. There's benefits. There's always a cost benefit kind of ratio in any such calculation, and I think in this case, just from the information that tends to be available, the costs are very apparent, or the benefits are very apparent, the costs are not very apparent.
I think also the timing of that, what year was that when you first did the dot?
94 when they first
really
well,
that was well before they've had an environmental impact assessment law on the books since 1980, early 1980s, but the new, it was revised and significantly improved in 2003, and then about a year and a half ago they passed environmental impact assessment public participation regulations. And that's just getting going. The first public hearings were in Beijing, right? And so you have to think that it's going to take a while for that stuff to filter down to the Miao village up in Hunan province. But I think that's a point well taken. And we're hoping that, as we're moving forward, that's also kind of information that we want to make sure that we help communicate, as I said, part of my job is also educating the scientists, and that letting them know that obviously if you were going to get involved in another dam issue, that there'd be Amelia and I making sure that in the conversations that someone says, was there an EIA done? And where is it? And so the idea, I'm not, who knows if that will happen, but we're hoping that this partnership goes beyond the USAID grant, and that it just, I don't know, it's fun, but that's kind of our role as well.
May I just make one more comment about that, if I may? One thing just to point out is there is increased awareness of kind of the karst and to some degree the ecological efforts or ecological situation generally in the Southwest, because that last year there was a very severe drought in Chongqing and Sichuan, and including some of the karst areas there. And for example, our colleagues at Southwest University, following that drought, and I think to some degree motivated, they've just gotten a grant a few months ago of 5 million yuan from the Ministry of Science and Technology, dealing with issues in Chongqing of water, and some of that actually has ecological impacts. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's good.
My question, Martha Drosvich-Holler from the World Bank. My question is more on the geologic aspects of the dam. I mean, there is the social implications and the ecological implications. But when you construct a dam in a karst area, yes, perhaps you don't have as much evapotranspiration, so it's kind of okay. But when you start putting foundations in a karst environment, and the nature of karsts is they're dissolved by water, what are long-term, short-term, immediate, and ecological and environmental implications from building a dam in a karst environment?
Well, in fact, I can give there's a primer that can be easily found, and that is that if you go to the internet, and if you go to Google and put in Wolf Creek Dam, which is in Tennessee, right now there's very big issues that there's a dam in Tennessee, one of the largest reservoirs in the eastern U.S. on the Cumberland River, has a dam in a karst area that the U.S. Corps of Engineers has is permanently until it's fixed, or until it's fixed. There's a permanent lowering of the level because of concern of failure of the dam. And emergency procedures, emergency revised flood maps have been distributed in libraries throughout Tennessee for the Cumberland River all the way down to Nashville. And so there's a case study right now that there's a lot of concern in terms of, and that's a service dam, but in a karst area. In terms of the underground dam, boy, I guess one thing in China is, and obviously you have to be careful not to overgeneralize, but it's not hard to see some pretty spectacular examples of engineering in China and dealing with problems. So we're leaving the ecological issues out for the moment, and I'm very hopeful for my colleagues. One of the things that is a very big issue, as you rightly suggest, if you raise the water level, and they're talking about 200 meters or roughly 600 feet, then one of the things about the limestone is it's full of little tubes. And so one scenario, and I don't obviously wish this for my colleagues, but one scenario, at least that I have in my head, is the picture of the giant cliff with the waterfall that you see once the dam goes online is jets of water sort of streaming out about a mile straight before they even start dropping, from the pressure. But at the same time, they're very, very skilled at what's called grouting, which is drilling wells and injecting high pressure concrete. In fact, in Yunnan, they have a spectacular in engineering sense reservoir that they built on karst in the Mongsa area that's had huge economic development, where they made what's called a grout curtain, and I don't remember the statistics, but something more than half a kilometer long, sort of basically a curtain blocking sort of the entire rock. So you're exactly right that there's very big challenges. The Chinese, again, without overgeneralizing, have a lot of experience in learning to overcome those challenges. So I think there's some chance of success. What the cost will be in terms of the ecological aspect, I don't know. But these questions are exactly appropriate to the situation there.
But one of the things that you guys did is that you had your diving teams go in and really make a better map to help them know what was going on in that cave.
Yeah, in fact, just for an example, one of the things there was concern, what happens is if you go upstream, in the cave where the waterfall is coming out, where they're going to build where they are building the dam, in that area, in fact, where they wanted to put the dam is a place where the passage gets completely flooded, where the ceiling comes right down to the water level. And they hadn't been able to go past there. And part of what they invited us to do is bring cave divers to go in and map out some of those sections. And one of the things they were concerned about was if there was flooded portions and then there was air filled, the ceiling went back up, that if there was pockets in there when the water came up, that there would be, and I'm not an engineer, so I'm not sure exactly what would happen. So they're conscious, and I don't really, in fact, whether that creates a problem or not, because I'm not an engineer, but we asked them, they asked us to do the work, and we did. And so they're certainly aware of the technological challenges, and and the word pragmatic keeps coming up, that they're just do what they need to do to deal with them. And you can find examples of that throughout China. Yeah.
Oh, so we'll just do one more on this side of the room, and then we'll start migrating that direction. 1, 2, 3.
Hi. This question is for Amelia. What's the average education level in the rural areas, and do you find problems with ignorance with regard to certain subjects or ideas? Thank you.
So maybe in terms of them being to participate, because you've done a lot of work in Yunnan in rural areas like this and other PRA projects.
I think I can speak for the 3 communities that we visited. I think their education level is around junior high level. So they are educated, but they are not educated in the high school in most cases. And in terms of ignorant of issues, well, I can think about in public health. I think it has a lot of things to do with the government too, where they do not have documentation of the illnesses in the village. When we ask them about the public health issues, illnesses related to water or waterborne diseases, they don't know anything about that, and they say there's no occurrences of waterborne diseases or illnesses, and we don't think that's the case, but it's mainly because of the public health system in the rural communities in China, where they don't have access to medical care and no insufficient facilities of public health medical care for local people, and in this case we think that would be a challenge for us if we are linking the access of water to public health in the communities.
Can I add to that? I know in a number of rural areas in China that the women's federations some of them have kind of created their own. Do you guys familiar with the Women's Federation in China? It's like a government created NGO ostensibly, but some of them, like I know in Xi'an and other places, have created these. They've broken off into their own little NGOs, and they do outreach to women on health issues in rural areas. As you've been wandering around and talking to people in Mengsa, are there any kind of initiatives like that working with women? Because I'm just curious if there. I have a feeling that this strikes me as kind of an area where there really hasn't been a lot of kind of outreach by those type of organizations.
Right. When it comes to the women-related health issues, I think those advocacies or those outreach that they do, they're mainly focused on birth control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very influential department of the government as well in the local areas. In fact, we were trying to ask when we visited the villages, we're trying to ask about the situations with the one-child policy.
Well, it's not one child because it's minorities, so it's probably two-child policy.
Yeah, but they're still, controlling the birth, but it's very sensitive. And I would guess that in relation to that, other public health issues will also be very sensitive, and if we try to find out statistics of that, that would be very difficult.
But those are definitely people that you want to also involve in the PRA process, because the one thing is that they are that kind of network of even the birth control folks. I mean, they are very influential. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It was just something that I've been kind of thinking about. We don't get to see each other very much. She's like hanging out in Yunnan. So. Okay, this right here in the back. Mayu?
I'm Peter Kern from the University of Montana, and I have two questions. I think one's technical and one's more social. Both have to do with health implications of your talk, and they both arise out of my own experience in the backcountry in Montana. So the first question has to do with the quality of the water. I wondered, in Montana, when we come across a stream, the water is usually very pristine, and there's a cleansing function that goes on through the soil. Is that happening when water goes through caves, or is it not? And what kind of quality do you find, and what are the implications of that in terms of treatment? The social question has to do with Chris's discussion of the beautiful waterfall and the great drop there in the 600-foot hike that people had to take to get water and bring it back, and you talked about all the complications of that in terms of time away from children and so forth. But there might be a very positive health function of having to climb down 600 feet and then back up again in terms of conditioning.
Well, I'll start out, and you feel free to add. The first question is something in my work I'm very, very much involved in, and I didn't really talk about it here. Is that I'll start off by saying that I have a rule from having kind of been in the cave business and spending time going through caves and in springs and stuff like that. I have a rule about drinking water, kind of untreated water in karst areas. And even though the limestone springs are, I will come back to in a moment, kind of reputed, in some circles to be especially good. And that is that I don't drink any untreated water in a cave or a cave spring at any time for any reason at all. And so, in fact, even in pristine areas, these systems, as you can kind of guess from water, there essentially is limited or no filtration at all, is the first problem, and where you have rivers that are just sinking underground. The other places where you have areas where the water is absent at the surface, the reason is because any water, it rains, the water, it's so permeable, the water is just underground. It cannot be sustained at the surface in many cases. So this means water is moving down very quickly, which means anything that's put on the ground or sort of the near surface, including septic tank effluent, animal waste, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, used motor oil, et cetera. For example. And I focus mainly on kind of agricultural issues because a lot of the karst areas, and including in China, are subject to agricultural contamination. But I could just go on and on about this. But I guess another statistic is that, for example, as I mentioned before, a lot of work I do in my students is in and around Mammoth Cave National Park because it's close by and a spectacular karst area. And even though a national park is essentially the most highly protected kind of land in the United States, the underground rivers in the national park, the cave is so extensive, the upstream ends are coming from outside the national park in agricultural areas and of south central Kentucky. And in terms of where you have people, agricultural land use, in terms of threats to water quality, is about as benign as it gets. It's certainly not, urban, factory, commercial, whatever. And even in the national park, I have colleagues that have made measurements of the underground rivers in the cave inside the national park, where after rains, where there's a lot of cattle, for instance, the animal waste, the feedlots, runs very quickly through the ground. It's carried by the rains, where we have data that the drinking water standards for fecal bacteria, the bacteria from human and animal waste in Mammoth Cave National Park, in the cave, exceeds drinking water standards by 50,000 times. I know data in Iowa that they've gotten in northeast Iowa from cave systems where actual water sample has exceeded drinking water standards by more than 1 million times for fecal bacteria. And I could go on and on. I'll try to refrain myself. but that kind of sets that up. One thing, and I have a set of slides I didn't put in today that I thought about. And one thing is I run into people a lot that say, "Well, I thought limestone springs were supposed to be especially good." And I think part of this may be a multi-decade advertising campaign by the Jack Daniel's distillery, and you see these kind of black and white ads in the back of like Smithsonian or whatever, where they're spitting and whittling and sitting on the porch and whatever, and so which actually these decisions are made in a corporate boardroom in Louisville, Kentucky, in a big corporate whatever. But anyway, but a series of the ads says this is the water from our limestone spring from which we make Jack Daniel's, and they show guys like cups drinking it and whatever. And well, it turns out that many of the whiskey distilleries in Kentucky and Tennessee are karst springs, and it turns out that that's good. But making whiskey and drinking water are two different things. It's good for whiskey because, without being too technical, limestone is a buffering agent, which means the pHs of limestone water tend to be neutral to high. Iron is insoluble under such conditions, essentially. So there's low iron. Iron makes whiskey taste bad. So you want no iron in whiskey water. You also, when you make whiskey, you have to boil the water. And so that kills the bacteria. So it's just fine. But I think that at least to some degree that those ads of like, well, man, sitting around from the the cool limestone spring, to some degree has kind of implanted this in the mind. So the answer is. My advice is don't do it, I guess. The other thing is that I guess I've actually been looking into the literature a little bit about health effects of carrying water. And at least in the literature, what I've seen, clearly exercise is good, but at least what I see documented is more about injuries, about kind of neck and spine injuries, from carrying water. And I haven't really thought about it in terms of positive benefit, but certainly exercise is good. My sense is that the people in these communities, since they don't have cars, they couldn't afford gas anyway at $3 a gallon. A lack of exercise is probably not too much of a problem for them generally. But that is an interesting point. So do you have any sense of that?
Well, unfortunately, I haven't been to the waterfall, so I haven't got a chance to see people walking up and down for the water. But I think it helps maybe with the exercises, but definitely it takes the time out of the people's daily lives, because for the other case that we went and see, that's only 5 minutes walk to the Muddy Water Reservoir. And in that village, although there may be public health or the quality issues with the water that they get for their consumptions, but in that village we find a lot of the people, they don't complain about the health issues, they don't complain about carrying water, but they complain about too much time left, because it's relatively short distance, and they are when we ask them about what are the needs that you see to improve your living standards, then they would ask about they would talk about what about other activities that we can generate income. So that's the difference, and that's the effect on carrying water, I think.
One other thing I'll kind of note that, again, from sort of looking into some of the papers, and this hasn't been extensive at all or exhaustive, but one of the other health impacts is that there's at least some studies I've seen in Africa where there's a hygiene issue, that the more trouble it is to get water, the more willing, and I don't, at least in these studies, I'm trying not to overgeneralize again, but at least it's been shown under some conditions, the more trouble and time it takes to get water, the more people are willing to kind of lessen their hygiene standards in terms of bathing and that sort of thing. So what that points out is it's not necessarily a black and white issue, and like a lot of things, it's complex. But that's a good point.
Should note that earlier in this year, OECD they had a very extensive study on environmental performance reviews for China, and they had an estimate that 30,000 Chinese children die each year because of drinking dirty water. I mean that's all over China. I mean, we know water pollution is a huge problem, and I think that one of the most fascinating things. It was fascinating to learn about how bad karst water actually is, the quality, and now I have to ask you a question to highlight something that you guys discovered in your trip in March too, is that while the pollution issue was not part of the project, and maybe still isn't, but you guys did discover that there are some definite upstream, downstream problems, and it's something to think about in the future is because the upstream downstream is so far apart, there could be a mountain in between them because the river's going underneath, but the idea of how we're pondering this, that how to think maybe moving on in the project, how to actually create kind of an upstream downstream dialogue, which is hard in China anyway. Yeah, you're making face that. It's the whole upstream downstream payment for environmental services. I'd love to see that something's happening in China on that. Please let me know. Not really happening yet because the fact that water is ostensibly free and a lot of other issues, but I think in the karst area, because of what he just said about the water quality issues, this is serious. There's ostensibly no health care in rural China, so dirty water is,
Yeah, and this has played out another theme that's common in karst areas is again this disconnect when something's hidden away where, as Jennifer mentioned, I didn't mention here, in fact, water quality is very much on our minds. And although we certainly are very pleased with USAID's generosity, this is such a huge thing. It's not that we're not interested in water quality; it's just really trying to focus in a kind of a triage kind of way. But a common theme is this disconnect between land use upstream and water quality impacts downstream. If it's a river and you know it's coming down there, then people are aware of it. But in China, in Kentucky, it's very common. And just Jennifer mentioned in the plateau, I didn't mention here, there's tin mining and various other kind of industrial activities. Not a lot, but kind of in the downstream and near the downstream water. So there's impacts. And I guess quickly I'd say one, just to kind of describe the theme, another place where my students are working is in southeast Alaska, and there's a case there in Tongass National Forest where there's logging of old-growth forest in karst areas that's creating sedimentation that's going into caves up in the mountains, and that's coming down through the caves, which most people are not aware of, to come out of big springs, which are the headwater areas for salmon spawning streams. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that the water going through the cave, again, because of the pH and buffering, is the healthiest water for the salmon. And so there's a very clear connection between logging practices up in the mountains and the health of salmon fisheries, but people are not aware of it. And so, well, why should we, why should we, have sort of land use, issues up in the mountains? That's, no one lives up there. And so this theme is just, and certainly throughout China, is this pervades karst areas.
Okay, I think Francis again. So 1, 2, and 3.
To go back to the proposed dam, never let it be said that the Chinese lacked ambition in engineering projects. The
Yes,
talk
indeed.
about diverting the rivers from the south to the north. Have there been any other dams constructed so far with in these underwater karst formations anywhere in the world? Or is this going to be a first?
No, I don't think it's a first, and it's something that I've sort of been interested in looking into, and just kind of so what I know about it is just from relatively casual inspection. But I think I don't know the details, but I'm pretty sure there are other underground dams in China that have been built, and in Eastern Europe. Another major area of karst is to the west of the Adriatic Sea, kind of in the Balkans area, Slovenia, Bosnia. And they also, in Slovenia and kind of other areas of kind of the Adriatic coast, they also face pretty severe issues. And so they go back several hundred years of doing this sort of engineering and are quite skilled. So I think there's been some efforts there. I don't know, which I'm very interested in finding out. It's just too much fun, too little time. But I don't really have a sense of the success rate of the underground dams because, as was pointed out, it's very big technical challenges. But you're right, the Chinese are very good at overcoming technical challenges if the resources are there.
Right, thanks.
Hi, Mike Rosenblum. Sort of a dual question as well, structured similar to that gentleman's. Two things, really. It seems like we have a more specific problem with some less specific solutions to it in terms of the water issue with the caves, and everyone is sort of focused on the dam issue. And you mentioned the great deal of deforestation in the 1950s around that time. I'd actually traveled to Guizhou province doing some relief work in 2001 and saw a lot of the physical conditions that you're describing with difficulty in farming and things like that. So first question is really, what degree, if any, is reforestation in these areas a contributing factor to the success of these types of projects? Or is it all, and are there any cooperative agencies that you're working with for reforestation in things like constructing the dam and those sorts of things? And secondly, I've not been to Yunnan province, but in Guizhou I know it's very culturally diverse with a lot of ethnic minorities. I'm sure, Jennifer, you can probably expand on that. I think there's like 43 or 47. It's, I think, the most ethnically diverse province. So what social ramifications are there for this type of a project where the point of origin of the water probably will not change, but as you said, with water shooting out like a mile in different directions, considering the type of landscape and having so much of the limestone, things like that, could the point of access for water change, and how would that affect the culture and the lifestyle of the people? Because I know that China's encouraged certain people in certain locations to relocate people living in caves and things like that, to encourage them to possibly relocate, and how does that affect things for them?
Well, I'll make a comment about the forestation and turn to Amelia here. From what I understand, that one source that I came across pretty recently, actually working on the next China environmental series, was that the overall the process of this this going from kind of a vegetated to a kind of rocky state is something that translates from Chinese of rocky desertification. And right now, at least from one recent source I saw, that the areas of, although the government, and I'll come back to this in a moment, is aware of the problem and considers it, rightly so, to be a very major ecological and human issue for China. That the areas impacted by rocky desertification are in fact increasing, even with with the efforts that are going on. I think, and this is not comprehensive knowledge of it, but just from what I do know about it from my experiences, I don't know if there's really much success with sort of wide-scale reforestation because of agriculture. Yeah, in the karst areas of the Southwest, Guizhou included. Because in fact in Guizhou, again, it's the poverty there is even at the provincial level. There's just not much in terms of resources there, so I don't think I'm aware of some kind of demonstration projects where they're kind of limiting in some of these tower karst areas where they're setting aside areas where the local folks are not allowed to collect firewood, not allowed to cut vegetation, and clearly. One site that I've spent some time at, there's certainly over decades it is possible to kind of regenerate these areas. It takes a long time if the soil's gone, but it slowly happens. But one of the other types of things I mentioned, the Ministry of Science and Technology grant that our partners just got for Chongqing. One of the major parts of that grant is working with farmers to look for, and vegetation kind of biological experts to work with farmers to try to find alternate crops to grow. For example, where you have places where these kind of rocky areas are, what soil is there may be in fractures, where there's sort of little pockets of soil, and where people are growing maybe like, one corn plant or, a couple corn plants or something, plus they're kind of, digging up the soil sort of in between, from farming, where an alternate situation is grow some sort of herbs, some medicine or, some plant with value that one can grow as sort of bushes or trees, whether it's tea or medicinal herbs or whatever it is. So one is that you're not plowing the soil, so you're keeping whatever soil is there. Plus, if you can, instead of getting 5 years of corn or whatever off of one plant out of that soil area, if you get something that you can sell for enough to buy a couple bushels of corn, or whatever, then that's one thing that there's very active interest in research and doing. Even some genetic kind of manipulation, whatever that is, to try to identify plants that can also live under those harsh conditions. But I think the area is expanding.
I mean, notably in China, since 1998, they have a timber cutting ban, right. And so there's a lot of parts of China. I mean, a lot of their forests are getting stronger, but I think the core issue here is that there aren't any trees, and
not soil,
and there's not soil,
right. Yeah.
and so that even there's also the slope land, switching from crops to trees, and I just think that the karst areas. I think when you looked at his first map that showed all the white area, I would fancy if you laid over their reforestation areas, those would correspond. That they're reforesting areas that actually have soil. So not doing much.
Social issues.
Yeah, you're right that Yunnan is the most culturally diverse province in China. Actually, it has more than half of the ethnic minority groups of the whole nation. And however, the social implication, I think, for because of the cultural diversity, is that actually not as much as one would expect, especially if we're talking about the upstream and downstream is within one prefecture. Because usually a prefecture like this one, if there are a lot of minorities living in there within, then it's an autonomous prefecture or autonomous region, where in this case it's Han and Yi, and these two minority groups usually have the say of how things are managed and things are run, and the other minority groups which are also living there usually have to conform to what's it's set as the management, as how it's managed. So that's the case, I think, with with the Chinese government system with all these autonomous regions. But there are problems if the rivers or the streams run across different regions that are inhabited by different minorities, and I think that is one of the key factors preventing or hindering some of the dialogues that we need.
But that would happen, anywhere in China, any transboundary water issue. Because of the stovepiping in the government, that we've seen many examples around China where either it's a pollution case that crosses two provincial lines. We wrote about it a couple of years ago in my publication that the farmers couldn't negotiate with who's across the border, and their provincial government wouldn't help them, so they rented some bulldozers and built a dam. This was in Zhejiang province and flooded into Jiangsu. It just, so that water conflicts in China, when it crosses boundaries, there's no administrative mechanism to really help it. And it gets out of control very quickly. There's a lot of violence. The Ministry of Water Resources has got some, I have to go look it up, astounding numbers, how many water conflicts there are, just transboundary in China. So again, and that has nothing to do with the minority issue. It's just basically the political jurisdictions. I have a question right here. Another one. I got it. Two water and three. 1, 2, 3. Right in a row. We'll go to this gentleman first, her, and then you, and then we'll close it out. So we've just got a few minutes. So succinct queries, please.
We make do in the U.S. on average with 100 gallons a day per person.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, in the 3 villages that you spoke about, do you have data for their daily water use, and what would be ideal?
Not 100 gallons.
I think less than 100 gallons a day.
Well,
yes. Yeah, I don't know.
No. Actually, for your information, the cistern is 25 cubic meter volume. So that's for the whole household.
Yeah, and during the dry season, it does rain some, but I think it's not unusual in some cases, for it to go a couple weeks, without any rain. So they must run into issues there. They're mindful of conservation.
Right.
So that's one conservation method. So I guess
nationally, China is 1/4 of the world average for per capita water resources. Now, one thing, but I would like to. We do need to find this. There are numbers saying that northern China, which is god awful dry, is 1/10 the world average per capita, and I would guess that southwest China is also probably 1/10.
Well, at least up in the plateau.
Up in the plateau, but no one thinks to ask that question because it rains. It's a monsoon. But I think we need to find this. There must be some Chinese researcher out there who knows this. So let me know, everyone. Right here.
Ting Shu from Johns Hopkins. I have 2 questions I'll try to ask you very quickly. Have you? The first one is for Dr. Groves. Have you done any research about the quality of water in city supplies, like the tap water? Because I'm actually from the area that of Southwest University in Beibei.
Oh, really?
And, yeah, and what I noticed is that, actually a lot of city people take their bag, have tons of bottles, and they go to the mountain every day, try to get water from the mountain, because they're complaining about the water quality from their tap. So have you done any kind of research about this? Is this like just a superstition of the people, or what's going on? The second question is for both of you. what is the local government's role in your outreach and your research? Is there anything that needs to be improved? What are the support from them, and what are the obstacles from them? Thank you.
I'll start with the first one, and that is that I haven't personally done any kind of research in kind of urban water supplies. My sense is that generally speaking, water treatment, as we would consider this country, is largely lacking. Even in, in Hong Kong, you can stay at a nice hotel and says, "Don't drink this water," and so so water treatment is generally lacking in both urban and certainly in the rural areas. And I'd say, as far as them packing up, go to the mountains, they've been reading too many Jack Daniels ads. I think it's the problem. But partly it's, I think, perception, in that I'd say in general, for drinking the water straight out of the tap in Bebe and going to a spring is equally bad. I really wouldn't suggest either one without boiling it. And so I think that's the case. I'll make one comment about the beginning of the second question and then pass off to Amelia. First, noting that in the transboundary issues, yet again, another kind of little karst twist is unless I'm kind of misremembering, the water at this river that we're trying to find sinks in Mungsa County and comes out in Taoyuan County. And so there's a transboundary issue there, but no one even knows that the river's under there or where it is. In terms of our working with the local government, that's something that as we work in China, me and kind of our partners, we're learning as we go along. And in fact, that's one thing we're going to be meeting about today, because we had one situation. We're working in 2 counties, and we have kind of good relations, I think, kind of at the prefecture level. And one of the counties we have been, for whatever reason, for our communication and whatever local conditions, we have good communication with one of the counties and have had less success with the other county. And in fact, on our kind of trans plateau trip that Amelia described, some of the officials that were working with us, just somewhere kind of, just in the middle of just driving down the road on the plateau somewhere, we stopped the car. They had to get in the Jeep and go back because we were at the county line. And so we continued that they could not. And in fact, with that, and one thing, I don't know if, there's also challenges in Mungsa or Taoyuan, with some of the other drug issues and things. I don't know if that has, but you might comment on the situation there.
Yeah, definitely. I think we have to engage the local governments. It's very important. It's not just community engagement or outreach, it's also the government. And as you know, the condition in China is that without the local government's approval or endorsement, basically, you cannot work in the communities. So that's actually our priority too. When we first got in for this project, we worked with the Bureau of Land and Resources, which is, the people who are in charge of, karst, hydrogeology, things like that, the technical side. And that's not enough, definitely. And I think our challenges is to engage the other bureaus at the county and prefecture level. And the bureaus, they don't work with each other in China, and it's going to be difficulty for us to see how they can work together, especially when we talk about public health issues and other birth control things like that. Then we need the information and the participation of other local governments. And I think we're going to do it the conventional or the most direct way in China, which is to engage the one level up government, so that they will coordinate all the relevant bureaus to work with us on this project. And it's very true that we are working in 2 counties, and that's even transboundary. And it also surprised me a little bit that the officials stopped in the middle of nowhere after our second villages, and they said, they wave us goodbye, and they said that's the end of it. We're not going to pass that to Mungsa County. In that sense, if we work with the prefecture government, then we can have better coordinations. And that will be our
and one thing that we're going to do, we have another expedition going down there, and we've had some discussion. And in fact, we've talked to the Consulate General of the U.S. Consulate in Chengdu, which covers that area, to write a letter on behalf of the State Department to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, not Ministry, excuse me, Bureau of Foreign Affairs at the Yunnan province level, and just, explaining the project, the benefit for people in Yunnan, and, and sort of asking for gracious assistance. And so we're going to need to talk about that. So,
yeah. And we're going to, and then we're also going to be backing up. Well, it may not affect things on the ground. Chris gets, one thing I do is I arrange meetings. Chris is going to go talk to folks in SIPA and also the China's Ministry of Health, CDC. They have an Environmental Health and Food Safety Institute, because we also think that informing them about what they're doing on the ground, eventually some of this could filter back. Because again, you need to inform all levels as well. And again, it won't affect you immediately on the ground, but they could be helpful in time. And unfortunately, I'm a very honest person. I start on time, and I do my darndest to end on time. But they're still here to tackle. You can grab them right afterwards. But I want to thank Chris and Amelia for coming and give us an update, and I want to thank all of you